We've got a unique place where the soils and the growing conditions just meld together. I think there's very few places on earth that really happens.
And then I try to tell my dad, I says, you know what, we ought to plant some varietals. And all the old timers, oh, don't plant those darn varietals, they don't produce them, you can't sell them, there were no little wineries around.
I always liked the Russian River Valley, so scouted around and found this place. At that time, I was anxious to try Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and none of it was grown around here, except Joe Rochioli next door had a small patch he had tried.
Then I wanted to plant Pinot Noir, and my dad says, no, that stuff, and unless we do Gamay Beaujolais. And I says, no, I don't like Gamay Beaujolais. I said, that's, some of the wines that I've tasted is like rosé. This stuff produces 8-10 tons to the acre.
I always liked Pinot Noir, and we never had an American Pinot Noir, and I always felt this would be an ideal spot for it.
In France, they're limited to how many tons per acre they can grow to get the best quality. They're controlled. And I says, that's what we need to do here. So I looked for a French clone of Pinot Noir.
I think that Pinot Noir is one of those varietals that really does show the true expression of a vineyard site, of the soil, of the climate, of kind of the person growing those grapes, the terroir, if you will.
When it comes down to the terroir, the soils and that sort of thing, nobody really knows until you try it. There was an old prune orchard down below that we tore out and started over again with Chardonnay on the flat, and on the hills we did the Pinot. We made some guesses what we'd like to do as far as clones, and they all worked out pretty well.
From then on, I started planting more Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And that's about all I've ever planted since.
It didn't take long for people to realize a good wine when they see it, because it was pretty obvious this area made a very good combination with our climate and the grapes and the soils.
When God said, let there be great Pinot in California, he put his thumb down along West Side Road, and it happens to be this area.
The Russian River is a natural conduit from the ocean. The cool breezes come up the river.
There's a lot of fog. We have a very strong diurnal shift where during the growing season it gets very cold in the summer mornings and then very hot in the afternoons. But it doesn't stay hot. It cools back down. And if you look at that big shift, what happens is the grapes have to essentially start up new every day. It doesn't stay warm. We retain great acids because of this.
And when we get hot here, we have like a built-in air conditioner. Normally you get about 3 days of real hot weather, then the fog rolls back in. Clears off early, gets warm. That's ideal for grapes. That's one of the things that Russian River Valley has. You don't get further above Hillsburg.
You're going to get different chemical reactions when light is coming through fog versus direct sunlight like you would find out on the Sonoma coast or even parts of Monterey.
For example, the winery down at Williams Selyem had no cooling. They would have shutters that opened at night, and they're at the bottom of a creek, and the cool air would just chill the place out by morning, and they'd shut it up and keep the cool air in. So you can see the climate has a very important thing, but you have to kind of study it. There are all sorts of microclimates, and it's fascinating if you're interested in these things to see the differences.
Climate is got a big factor, microclimates. In this ranch we have 8 degrees difference between the hill and the bottom.
Following the tradition of what Bert and Ed were trying to do and what their whole business model was all about. And what intrigued them about Burgundy were these little bottlings and how different that this guy's 5 rows in the Vougeot vineyard was different from this guy's 10 rows. And they were right next to each other. The thing about Pinot Noir is I think you need to be very light-handed. You kind of need to let things evolve and stand back and take a more patient, hands-off approach. What we're really looking for is to show the true expression of that vineyard site so that we can say we're not trying to influence the wine as much by winemaking as we are by the vineyard site. So Bert over the years refined, I think, his winemaking technique into what I've kind of deemed now that we somewhat cookbook wine make. We use one barrel type, Francois Ferrer, Trancé, medium plus, toasted heads. We use one yeast strain. It's the Williams Selyem yeast strain. We have one malolactic culture. We use basically the same size fermenter for each lot. So what we're trying to do is replicate these fermentations no matter where the fruit's coming from. If it's coming from Vista Verde, our vineyards, John Dyson's vineyards, down in the Central Coast, or Farrington up in the Anderson Valley, or David Hirsch out on the Sonoma Coast, that fruit gets handled exactly the same. About 80% of my job is done out in the vineyard. So when Joe Rochioli or David Hirsch deliver fruit to me, at that point, you really have to take some odd turns, I think, to make a bad wine. The Rochioli River Block is probably one of my favorite vineyards, year in and year out. And why? There's some flavors and textures. It's got a very, very long finish to it. It's not the darkest colored wine, but it's a pretty wine. It just kind of screams Pinot Noir. I see a guy who is just the salt of the earth, a real farmer.
I've been doing it all my life. I can look at a vine, I can tell you how much grapes can be put on it, and I've got my men trained now. You know, you can overcrop a vine or you can undercrop it. So, you know, it takes a balance.
His whole goal in life, I think when Joe gets up in the morning, is to grow the best grapes he can. Now, Joe also farms the Allen Vineyard, and you know, it's probably one of the more famous vineyards in our repertoire here. What I like about the Allen Vineyard is I've always thought that, again, it kind of exuded Russian River Valley Pinot. The flavors in the Allen are much more subtle than the Rochioli River Block. There's more of a floral note to it, more of a rose petal, lighter fruits, kind of the strawberry, raspberry, versus the River Block to me, which is much more plums and blackberry, the darker fruits. What I personally like about the wines themselves that are making, I like the balance of those wines. I think that the balance of the acids, I don't think you need to pick these at 27 or 28 bricks. We don't need 15, 16% alcohols. They're very mature. You've got two guys that have just been really good stewards of the land, and they haven't tried to manipulate it to be something that it's not.